Now, before we go any further, I think it's probably also a good idea to remind our listeners that Tolkien's concepts and his creations were constantly being updated and tweaked over many years. And for this reason, there are some conflicting ideas around many issues, some that we've already spoken about on this podcast, such as the origins of orcs. And there's actually a dedicated website with all the inconsistencies laid out. And that's pretty interesting. You can go there and you can just look up all the different areas where he changed his mind on things, or where there was different things being said.
Do you happen to know the name of that website?
I think it might just be a subpage of the Tolkien Gateway. But if you just Google...
they might have changed the name of the website.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't very consistent. So if you just Google like Tolkien Inconsistencies, it'll probably be... I think that's what I Googled, and you'll find...
Right.
It's one of the first matches there. But... So what I wanted to look at was another instance in earlier writings of Tolkien when he initially states that there were many Balrogs, perhaps thousands. So as we already mentioned in some of the earlier battles in the first stage in the Silmarillion, there were just Balrogs showing up all over the gaff. And it was like, oh, this one elf took out 3 Balrogs, and then some of the ones that just arrived on their Uber dragon and all this kind of stuff. So initially the Balrogs were often described as being immense in numbers. So if I look at the Book of Lost Tales, part 2, we'll see some commentary here by Christopher Tolkien, talking about the fall of Gondolin. And here Christopher says, the early conception of Balrogs makes them less terrible and certainly more destructible than they afterwards became. They existed in hundreds and were slain by Tuor and the Gondolin in large numbers. Quote, thus 5 fell before Tuor's great axe, Dramborleg, 3 before Ecthelion's sword, and 2 score were slain by the warriors of the king's house. So immediately there, we're getting 2 score slain by someone, then 5 by Tuor and 3 by Ecthelion. So there's loads just been wiped out there. And then in later writings, Christopher Tolkien notes that, quote, in the margin my father wrote, there should not be supposed more than, say, 3 or at most 7 ever existed. And that was from Morgoth's Ring. So later on, he's changed his mind and he's thought, actually, you know what? There's minimum 3, maximum 7 Balrogs that have ever existed. So that's a pretty big change to go back on compared to his first one. I think it kind of makes them more, when they're more rare, then you can imagine that maybe their powers, maybe Tolkien was starting to imagine that their power was even greater when there was fewer of them. If there was loads of them, you couldn't have an army of Balrogs and have them all be just this incredibly insane Gandalf level powered beings, because they'd just easily wipe out all elves and all of Middle Earth. And back in earlier writings, it would have just been way too easy for them to defeat things. So I think the earlier writings, there were loads of Balrogs and they're probably less powerful. But then later on in his updated ideas, there were fewer Balrogs, max 7, and they were all much more powerful than at that point. Do you get me?
Yeah, but I get you. But like the published material, I don't know, it wasn't J.R.R. or Tolkien that published the Silmarillion, but that definitely mentions like many Balrogs, or it gives the impression that there was lots of Balrogs in these battles.
Oh yeah.
So yeah,
but
it's a contradiction, but that's not like it's like a lesser canon to me, because the actual published material is largely talking about a lot of Balrogs. So
sure.
Okay. What do you think about it?
Okay, so you're saying that the lesser canon would be the fact there's only 3 or 7, or between 3 and 7.
Like I would have thought that, when I first watched the movie, I would have thought that this was the only one, or maybe there was only a couple of them. And then when I found out that they were Maiar level, or they were like the same as Gandalf, then I was like, oh right, maybe there's only a couple of them. But then when you actually read the Silmarillion, you're like, all right, okay, my views have changed again. But I'm not gonna change this view back to
not for you.
Like, oh no, there was only 3 or 7.
I don't know.
Mine's been too messed up.
I think it is the most updated thing. So I think that's what we probably should kind of take to be the gospel.
But like, it's kind of like making them similar to the Astari, but then why would Tolkien talk about them in the battles by saying, oh, and there were Balrogs and there were dragons? Like, if there were that few Balrogs in any existence, they would all have names. They'd all be known. I know there was Gothmog, Durin's Bane, that's not really a name, but you know what I mean? They would have all been very individualized. Like, we've got names of all the Astarians.
They were very shy, though. They didn't introduce themselves very much.
Yeah, 7 though. That's too few.
Well, there you go. Anyway, that's all I can tell you. That's the most updated thing. That's but as you said in the published material that we have, in the printed word of Professor Tolkien, which was
Gospel.
edited by his son Christopher Tolkien. The Silmarillion was edited by Christopher Tolkien. We do get, as you said, loads of mentions, as I've just read them before there, of like 200 being killed by the warriors of the house. And
what's the score?
Who knows? 2-1, 3-3. That's a couple of scores. Is a score? No, a score is 10. Like 2 score would be 20.
I was thinking that, right? Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what it is.